Hi, everyone. I'm David Sugarman, your English teacher. And today we're learning a subtle but powerful modal, ought to. It's a polite, thoughtful way to give advice, recommendations, or even express regret about the past. You'll hear it in both daily life and professional English when people talk about what should be done. So let's go to the next slide and get started. The meaning ought to, it's like should, it's advisable. We ought to. It's to give friendly advice, talk about the right or sensible thing to do, and express expectation or moral obligation. Example: you ought to take breaks while studying to avoid burnout. Let's go to the next slide. Here's the structure: it's ought to plus the base verb. You ought to eat healthier. He ought to apologize. They ought to finish the project soon. Same meaning as should, but slightly more formal or serious. Now let's learn the past form to express regret when we want to talk about something that should have happened in the past. So we use ought to have plus the verb three. And here are some examples of how we build that form together. You ought to have asked for help when you were struggling. He ought to have apologized earlier. They ought to have planned it better. It's often used to criticize gently or show regret. Here, I've built you a comparison table. A lot of my students like these. So we have ought to versus should. Let's start with the expression should. The meaning, it's common in just giving general advice, and the tone is very neutral. In ought to, it's polite, slightly formal, it's a little bit more thoughtful, moral, and gentle. Here's an example: you should call your mom. That's friendly advice. You ought to call your mom is slightly more caring and moral tone. Here are some real life examples. You could repeat after me if you would like to. I'll say each sentence and let it sink in. You ought to rest. You've been working too hard. We ought to finish this report today. He ought to have told us the truth. They ought to have checked the data before sending. This is perfect for expressing expectations or missed action. So, guys, we've reached a practice section. And what I typically like you to do here is to take out a pen or pencil and your notebook and write down your answers. Stop the video. I'll read out this to you. You can stop the video as you would like and then replay it to check your answers. If you want more practice, you can go to davidenglish.info and I have there more practice, more drills, and more exercises to do under ought to in the advanced section. Practice. You take a break after working all day. 2. She told the manager about the issue earlier. 3. We start saving money by now. 4. He see a doctor about his back pain. 5. They listen to your advice. All right. Write down your answers and let's go to the next slide and check your answers. Here are the answers. We can check them together and I'll read them out to you. Number 1, you ought to take a break after working all day. She ought to have told the manager about the issue earlier. Number 3, we ought to have started saving money by now. Number 4, he ought to see a doctor about his back pain. And number 5, they ought to have listened to your advice. So remember, the present is ought to plus the verb, and the past is ought to have plus the verb 3. Common mistake is that people forget the word to after ought, right? Because of the word should, you don't need to use to. But ought, you need to use to. So here's an example. He ought to study more. That's okay. But below it, people say he ought study more. So remember, be aware of that. She ought to have told me is correct, but incorrect, she ought have told me. So be careful there because of the word should. A lot of people make mistakes because they're so similar. And one last thing, here's a little recap. It's always important to do a recap. Ought to is advice and moral duty. Ought to have is regret or criticism. Remember, it's more polite and reflective than should. And it sounds natural and mature in both daily and professional English. Remember, you did amazing today. And keep on going. I believe in you. And the more that you do, the better you're going to get. Now go to davidenglish.info to practice the advanced ought to quiz and learn how to express that better. See you later in the next video. Hi, how are you today? If you would like to elevate your English level where people actually understand you, where you're not making mistakes, where you're not confused, where you have control of your English, then you're in the right place. My name is David Sugarman. I've been teaching business English for over 12 years, and I can really help you. Currently, right now, I'm teaching in big companies like Diplomat Israel, like IKEA, and others. If you would like to hear more information, please reach out to me over here. Bye for now.